All right, everybody. So welcome to Hear Our Voices. This is a second segment where we amplify Black voices in architecture and design. Um, so a little bit about me. My name is Adam Denias. I'm an architect at JHP Architecture and Urban Design in Dallas, Texas. And I founded the Facebook group Next Architects, which is where this event's coming from. And so I've been in the profession about 4 years, and I'm really passionate about professional development. And I really think as a collective, we can really build up the next generation of architects. That's what I'm all about. For anybody who's not a part of Next Architects, we're really encouraging atmosphere, and we discuss everything, including career situations that come up, how to go about promotions at work, dealing with toxic workplace environments, and really building the career that you want, creating the new normal. So with that being said, tonight's about the featured panelists, and I've got my co-host with me, Randy Wilburn, founder of Encourage, Build, Grow. Randy, could you give us a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been involved in the design industry since about 97. So I've had a real affinity for this space and have worked with engineers and architects for more than 2 decades now. I'm primarily focusing on the areas of leadership development, communication, and personal development for design professionals. So I'm excited to be in this space supporting all of my brothers and sisters here on the call and for us to amplify these voices as much as we can because needless to say, back in '97, nothing was being amplified. So we've come a long way since then, and this is our second go around of this event. So I hope everybody that's listening in takes heart to what they're hearing, and your voice matters. So if nobody else reminds you of that tonight, I'm going to remind you of that. Your voice matters, and you have something to share. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all of our panelists tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Randy. So tonight we're going to give the space to listen to you guys. So each of you are going to get 20 minutes to speak about what you'd like. You can share experiences that you've had in the profession. You can talk about how systemic racism's impacted you or impacted others in their careers. You can talk about any obstacles that might be holding back Black professionals. And also we can talk about how we can take action and support each other and be better allies. So if there's anything you're not comfortable with sharing, you don't have to share it. It's totally led by you. So yeah, with that being said, at the end of the night, we'll either continue the discussions that we started and then jump into a Q&A. Session is being recorded, and if there's a portion that you decide after this you don't want publicly published, just let me know and we'll take it out within a week. And before we start, next week is the Young Architect Summer Series, and Randy and I will be speaking at that. And I talked to Michael, and he gave us 2 tickets to the Young Architect Summer Series. So I posted a link. It's a little ways down. I'll repost it. The link is a giveaway. We're giving out 2 Young Architect Summer Series tickets. And what the Young Architect Summer Series is a 5-day online event for young architects by young architects. The talks are focused on personal and professional development, learning from community leaders and the unsung heroes, all helping each other reach the next level of success. So there's workshops, there's a big community, and there's live sessions and recordings. So it's going to be really awesome. Randy and I are we're going to be speaking on Sunday with a panel for Voices of Minority Architects. So we'll be back there doing our thing. So yeah, anybody who's here tonight, you can do the form for the giveaway, but you have until the end of this. So once we hit close, this is closed, okay? So real quick, we're going to go through each person, and I just want a few sentences about who you are, where you're from, and where you're at in your architectural career. All right, so let's start with Marcia.
Hi everyone, I'm Marcia McDonald. I hail from Jamaica and have had the good fortune of pursuing my architectural career both in Jamaica. So I did a bachelor's in Jamaica and then hopped over to Miami at FIU and did 2 masters. So I am on my way in terms of I'm in between. I'm an immersion professional, so I'm heading towards being an architect. But most importantly, along the way, I also was a professor, so I am an educator. So I'm also have on my timeline to complete a PhD. So I did a pre-doctoral degree, and my research was on culture and community, and especially diversity. So that's I'm looking to join the ranks not only in terms of being an architect, but also being a professor.
That's awesome. Thank you, Marcia.
You're welcome.
Moving on to Melanie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie Ray. I'm an architect at Horde Copeland Mock in Baltimore, Maryland. I work in the housing mixed use studio. I'm originally from Orange, New Jersey. Spent most of my time in Jersey City, New Jersey, but raised in PG County, Maryland, down here. I went to school at Penn State and graduated in 2015. And I've been here at HCM ever since. Even though I work in housing mixed use, I find a real passion in like community development and community engagement projects that we do.
Thank you, Melanie. Ricardo.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Ricardo de Jesus Maga Rojas. I am a senior project coordinator at Good Fulton & Farrow. We have a Dallas office, but I'm in the Austin office. I've been there for a little over 8 months now, started in November. So I was born in Cuba. I have Haitian and Jamaican roots as well. And I trace my lineage all the way back to Nigeria, especially the Yoruba tribe. So that's a little bit about me. I spent most of my time in Miami because after we immigrated to the United States in 1991, 92, that's when my family moved over. We came here on a plane. I know people typically ask, like, did you come on a boat or a plane? I'm like, no, I came on a plane. And then settled in Miami, spent high school there, took a drafting magnet, and then decided to pursue architecture long term. So I went to Tuskegee University, where I earned a bachelor in architecture and took a year off because of the economy and all of that stuff, and then came to Texas and started at A&M, Texas A&M, and earned a Master of Urban Planning there. I'm hoping to do a lot more community-centric work that explores race and culture and the disparities with therein. That's about it. Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Ricardo. Okay, and finally, Miss Julia.
Hi, guys. I'm Julia Weatherspoon. I am an architectural designer here in San Francisco at Smith Group. I've been in the profession for roughly 6 years, and I'm originally from Sacramento, so Northern California native, and I'm still here and loving it. I'm in the higher ed studio currently at Smith Group. I think a couple people might be on the call as well, so whoop whoop. But I've also worked in aviation. I've worked in workplace. I've done a little bit of civic work, but I think even outside of, you know, the day-to-day, the 9 to 5, I'm super passionate about diversity, inclusion, engagement, and all formats that comes in. And I am heavily involved in, involved in a lot of organizations and initiatives, really to kind of push the needle for us. And I'm super passionate about that. So I'll just stop there because we can get into it a little bit later.
Oh, great. Awesome. I was about to ask more about that, but if we're going to get into that, awesome.
Oh yeah, we'll get into it.
Cool.
We can talk for days.
Awesome. All right, guys. So like I said before, we're gonna start with one person, do 20 minutes, and then we're gonna go forward from there. I've got a timer on me, so I'll try to keep track. One day I'll have a system where I can do like a warning or something, but until then, I'm just gonna have to interject. Yeah. So that being said, would any of you guys like to go first? No.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll go first.
Okay, cool. All right. The floor is yours. So
So go ahead. I'll speak about anything.
yeah, just let us know, what about your experience do you want to share this tonight?
Sure. Most recently, I was able to work with my firm to get out a statement on Black Lives Matter and work towards building a more equitable practice for ourselves. And I'm very proud of that. It took having difficult and uncomfortable conversations to get there. But I think it's worth it. I will say that it took me some time internally to debate this, and I reached out to several mentors about what should I do and how should I approach this, because I wanted to make sure that I was coming off from the most passionate of places, without seeming like an angry Black person, because that's always something hard to navigate with. The fact that you don't want to get pinged with the stereotype of the angry Black person. And so for me, something that I really talk about a lot is relying on allies or working with your allies, because we're more effective together than we are apart. And for me, it's been so helpful to have those allies at work, because whenever I feel that I can't get somewhere, there's another passion that's going forward. They're like, no, we're going to keep this momentum going. We're going to bring this up. We're going to make it evident. And it's not always easy doing that, because for me, I feel like I've been told I have a type A personality, that I like to be control over everything. So I'm not sure if that's my Cuban roots or what, but it took a lot of effort to kind of just like let go and let someone else, and really trust that, hey, they've got your back. They got your back on this, and they want you, and they want this as a firm to succeed. So I'm very proud of having done that. That's why I feel that having this platform to speak our voice and to have people hear our voice is important. There are people that have come out to me after I said that on Next Architects. Hey, I got my firm to do this. How did you do it? What did you say? And at the end of the day, it was just speaking up, being the first one to do it. There are times that we take a step back and say that we don't want to do it because we were afraid to be let go, or whatever the case may be. Someone said that to me, actually. They're like, I didn't want to speak because I was afraid I was going to get let go, or, and I was like, well, you should have just spoken up. And, and I can see how that's not always easy, an easy thing to say, because there are places out there that it doesn't matter for them. It's about coming in and coming to work and billing your time, and that's it. But you can't sit here and tell me that Black Lives Matter, that this is something that's political, and that we can't delve into the politics of things, because that's what AIA is here for. And I say that's crap, because architecture is political. And I have to say that, and I have to give a shout out to Siboney. I'm not sure if she's on here, but Siboney Diaz Sanchez is someone that I've spoken with and interacted a lot. And, we vibe on that same mentality that architecture is political. And she comes from things, she's super vocal and super active, and she's encouraged me to continue using my voice. I ran so many things by her, and she was just like, go for it. We need to be uncomfortable in these times. It's hard, but that's the only way that we're ever going to get through it. So I'm going to go back and say, use your voice. Don't ever be afraid. Find an ally if you are afraid. And if you are a non-Black person that is saying, well, I don't want to speak for all the Black people, that you're not no one should hold you to that, but you should speak up if you feel like there's something wrong that's going on, and work. Always make it a win-win when you bring it up to the firm. It's very easy to sometimes just nitpick and say we've been doing this wrong forever and ever, but then offer a solution. And I feel like that's where sometimes we fail. We always just want to criticize and not come out with a solution that will work for the mutual benefit of us. And I'm only speaking from one experience. It might be different for other people, but that's why I realize it's important for our voices to be heard.
For sure. What were some of I had kind of two questions, like, about how many people would you say did it take to get the firm to take action?
one.
I guess whenever you talk about people maybe that you spoke to and people who actually helped you kind of form this to the people who actually had to sign the policy or the statement, I guess like in the total, what was kind of that?
Okay, so it took me reaching out to my studio director, and then maybe there are 5 or 6 people on the management committee, and one other person, maybe 7 or 8, 9. So
Okay, I'm just curious. And what were some of the action points? Was it just a statement saying that, hey, you know, we want to just say, hey, we're for this, or did they have like actionable steps what they were going to do?
no, we didn't have actionable steps in our statement. It was more a stance of solidarity, but I did work with my firm to say, hey, you know, if we are going to do something, we should maybe start taking some action now. And before I could speak, they had already formed an EDI committee, more or less, well, with 2 principals co-chairing it. And so I am very excited to see how this starts to manifest itself, because now we are, each co-chair is responsible for a different aspect. So I'm over recruiting, but someone else is over not policy. One is policy and then outreach. So the co-chairs will meet internally to discuss, and then we'll go back to management and come up with our ideas. So we're kind of helping do some of the research and informing the future of EDI or JEDI at our firm. And I think it's going great. So we're meeting tomorrow to discuss more.
Yeah,
Because at the same time, you know, this takes time from work, right? And especially with COVID adding on the stress to firms, no one wants to. Everyone would want you as a profession. You know, we're meant to always be billing direct time to projects, right? Because that's what we're in it for. So in our conversations as an EDI committee, we want the firm to know that this is a commitment and that they should back this up with time. In my opinion, I don't think that this needs to be something that, oh, just work on it during work hours. If you think this is that important, give us work time. I understand that, you know, maybe due to COVID, we can't bill as much a non-billable time, but that's why we're meeting as co-chairs to kind of start identifying what those hours look like so that we can put some time to it. That's another thing I wanted to add.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've been trying to follow around what your firm's been doing, as well as others that have put up statements, and I see a lot of firms not doing anything. And yeah, I've heard stories of firms retaliating as well. Someone posted that in the feed, and it just goes to show you that the people don't matter. Black people don't matter. Not enough for them to be able to speak up and say something. Because when COVID happened, you can bet every firm was saying something about it, right? But I did not see the same reaction to the Black Lives Matters coming up again. So just something I noticed in the Facebook group. So yeah, I'm trying to keep track of kind of what's going on and how firms are kind of reacting, so we can try to figure out a way to get this all in a way we can spread. How can people begin to talk to their firms about this and get actionable items out of them? So.
Yeah, you know, I think also too, what I'm seeing is that a lot of firms are taking this to heart. I've gotten calls from several leaders of several large design firms that want to make a difference. I mean, they want to be proactive about doing this. And so, you know, my encouragement to everybody listening, so even for the one person that said, hey, I'm concerned about repercussions if I, you know, speak up too loudly, right? Because you don't want to be that squeaky wheel in this situation. But I gotta say that there is enough firms out there and enough firm leaders that are quote unquote woke and understand the deficiencies that exist. I mean, I've had some leaders just say to me, man, I really suck at this understanding of what African Americans are going through. Help me through this. And I'm like, yeah, well, absolutely. I said, first of all, you need to start talking to your people. You need to talk to everybody in the firm and understand, when I say everybody, anybody black or brown in your firm, so that you understand what they're going through on a regular basis. And it's just like some of the stories that we heard the last time around about microaggressions and all of these little things that, you know, we kind of turned a blind eye to because we're just so used to it, right? But I think we're at a day and time when you should never get used to it. And, you know, oh, by the way, if you're good enough as a designer and an architect, you know, you may ultimately need to step out and be somebody's competition, because that's the mindset that I think needs to take place especially with African-American design professionals, that you shouldn't feel like, you know, you shouldn't be walking around like Oliver with your hands out like, you know, more please. It's like, no, this is a chance for us to all elevate our voices and be heard so that people understand what needs to be fixed. And I think from a recruitment perspective, it will benefit well for a firm to improve on the DEI space, or I like the whole JEDI acronym. I think I like the justice, equity, diversion, and inclusion. I'm gonna start using that. But I think that we need to get out there and have the conversation. And yeah, it is gonna offend some clients. It may offend the sensibilities of some people in the C-suite, but you know, we're gonna have to push past this. I think we're at a place in time where we need to do that. And I also think that people need to be able to parse and make the distinctions. The challenge, I think, especially with Black Lives Matter specifically, and I'm just talking about the organization, is that when I articulate why Black Lives Matters, I talk about the Black lives, my 3 sons. Those Black lives matter to me, and the other Black people that I run into on the street. I'm not necessarily talking about, you know, an organization. I'm just saying my Black life matters. And here's why. And and all these panelists, their Black lives matter. And so you need to separate that. And sometimes you got to have a come to Jesus conversation with folks and let them understand what that means. That, yeah, I get it. You might not like some of the things that Black Lives Matters, the organization, does. That's fine. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because it's still a bigger conversation that we need to be having here, and we're finally having it. So let's have it, and don't sit back and say, oh, well, I just don't like the way they handle those things. If they did it differently, if it was more nonviolent or more peaceful, then we'd be okay. The reason why we're even here having this conversation is because people woke up and said, you know what, enough is enough. And there are collateral challenges from that. But I mean, again, talk about it. I mean, I was talking with Marcia earlier. She was talking about her kids. Her kids' Black life matters. That's what, when I say Black Lives Matter, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about an organization, because that's what people generally go to. So you have to drive the conversation and help them understand it, right? Yes, you can look at some of the things that Black Lives Matter does, and you adhere to it. You say, yeah, I'm all for this, but maybe there's other things about it that maybe you don't agree with. There's some things about Black Lives Matters, and I've studied them intently, that I don't necessarily agree with, but I understand where they're coming from. And that's the idea, is that we need to take time to listen and understand where people are coming from, and too often, you know, people are giving us the gas face and are like, no, I don't want to hear that. And I'm like, no, you need to hear this, because this is important. So I'm just encouraging, especially the younger folks. Well, I'm 51. You younger folks, you need to be sure about yourself and what your abilities are, and know that you're not on the wrong side of this conversation right now. You just aren't. And, you know, you need to hear it from an old head that will tell you, don't be afraid, you know, to thine own self be true, like Shakespeare said. You know, do you, and don't be afraid to share with people what you're dealing with. That's all. I'm sorry. Soapbox. I just wanted to share that.
All good. We still have 6 minutes. Ricardo, if you wanted to add anything.
Well, I'm just going to say that, you know, a lot of people don't want to acknowledge this because they have some kind of, I don't know if it's shame or regret or what it is. But yep, that's right. Rosa actually made a good point on it. But I'm just going to encourage everyone to just continue using your voice. I know I've had people who reached out to me who said, hey, I was let go from my job. I think it's because I spoke up too much. It wasn't the job for you. I'm sorry to tell you that. You know, I am sorry that you got let go, or I'm sorry you were, you know, but it's time to move on to greener pastures. And I would encourage everyone to, as you continue these interview process, for those of you who are starting to look for work, if you're fortunate enough to find work in this economy, start asking those conversations. Really, first start by looking at your values and what you align yourself with, and really ask those conversations at the beginning, because I feel that that's something that came up for me a lot as I started looking around for firms. Right around the same time you and I met, Adam, I had to make sure that the next firm that I was going to, if I was going to commit the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you better have the same values. You know, I'm looking at it like it's going to be a marriage. So just, but make sure that your values align with whatever firm that you work for, because it's your career at the end of the day. So make the most of it.
Yeah. Thanks, Ricardo. Anything else you want to add? Anything, Randy? Anyone else?
I can't wait to hear what these ladies have to say. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of want to jump back to I saw Julia like making faces at the firm statements.
Yeah.
It's tough right now because I'm sure all of us have been pulled into the room to help craft the firm statement or whatever the firm statement is going to be. And I just want to encourage anyone who is a part of that conversation to not forget about those actionable items as well. Because,
Yes.
you know, it's great if a firm affirms that Black Lives Matter on the website, but then what are they actually doing to back that up? And I think that's what we're starting to see now after all these firms did make those statements. People are going through their websites, they're going through their firm, you know, diversity commitments. And it's like, well, you saying that you commit to diversity is the bare minimum, you know,
Right.
Beyond that, what are you guys doing?
Right. And I agree 100% with Melanie. I think that when the statements were first coming out, we saw the in solidarity with Black lives. We saw kind of like empty statements, and then largely there weren't action items set behind that. And then I think a lot of Black designers went back and pushed for those things, right? And then when you're starting to outline those things and the ways that you're going to move forward, I think a lot of people, if you have the opportunity to in your offices to even like push more and say, okay, what is the makeup of your board of directors? What is the makeup of your studio leaders? What is the makeup of your market directors, right? To really push the issue and say, this is not just a problem for us as employees, but it's a problem for the firm, and it's a problem of the industry in itself. So I agree with you, Melanie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're pretty much at the 20-minute mark. Thanks, Ricardo. If anyone thinks of anything for this conversation at the end, we can come back to it. So would either of you three like to go next?
I can go next.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, Melanie.
Okay, 20 minutes.
Yep, 20 minutes.
So I kind of wanted to use my platform to talk about why it was important for me as a young Black woman to pursue licensure, to get licensed, and to contribute to that increasing number of Black women architects in the country. So I kind of had a different approach or introduction to architecture. A lot of people mentioned that they didn't really get introduced to it until later on. I was introduced very early. My father is a licensed architect, and so I knew probably 3 to 4 Black architects by the time I had graduated high school. To me, this was always a field that was attainable or achievable. And one of the first issues that always gets to me is when people ask, you know, well, how did you become an architect? Like, how did you find architecture? Like, almost like Black women aren't supposed to be in this field. It was like, well, I probably was introduced to architecture before you even knew about it when you were my age. But, you know, that trying to break that stereotype is extremely important to me. So when I started school, I was one of 4 students in my freshman class at Penn State. We entered in 2010. And by the end of the first year, we were down to 1, and that was me. I tried not to let it faze me. I was really focused on the goal of just being an architect. And so I found areas outside of the School of Architecture to, keep me grounded. But I still remember one of the reasons why the other Black girl who was in our first year class, she dropped after the first week because within the first couple of days, we were asked to go out and drop $250 on an architecture supply kit that we used maybe half of the materials within it. And she could not come up with $250, and unfortunately she had to drop. And so that first layer of that barrier, that this is such a high cost of entry into the field of architecture, is keeping so many of us out from being able to pursue that. So, I finished school, started at HCM shortly after that, and licensure was very much in my mindset. I was very aware of what the requirements were, what it took to take all of the tests, and at the time I believe we were just under 400 Black women architects in the US. So again, I wanted to be able to contribute to that. One thing that I always referred back to, and NCARB recently released this, was the By the Numbers report, showing that we are starting architecture school, we're starting the AXP process, but we're not finishing within a timely manner. And so what are those barriers that are stopping us from being able to achieve that? I remember when I took my final exam, I passed the last exam, and it was actually February 2018. And to me, it was so very powerful that it was also Black History Month. So it was like, this was such a meaningful time and point in the year to finish that exam. And so I'm the 424th living Black women architects. I believe we are now at 488. We're really close to 500. So I'm just gonna plug anyone who's not there. We just need 12 more to get to 500 before the end of the year. That's the push. But I remember going to my first NOMA conference as a sophomore in school and wanting to be a part of that club. NOMA, for anyone who doesn't know, is the National Organization of Minority Architects. And just being in that room full of this beautiful Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are in the field of architecture was just amazing. So for me, it was important to become an architect, but it's also important now that I am an architect to continue to be a good architect. I can stand and talk about Blackness and being a Black architect for days. I'll always be able to speak my truth. But it's also important to be valued within the skill set that you have, valued and respected for what we do. To me, it's really not enough just to hire a bunch of Black architects, but what are you doing to cultivate that skill? I'm reminded of one particular question I was asked within we have an EDI task force at our firm as well. And one of my coworkers, very well-meaning, just asked like, oh, so like diversity is your thing, right? And it was like, I mean, I am, but it's not my thing. That's not the reason I was hired here. 90% of my time is billable work. So I still want to be a contributing, architect within this firm. I kind of piggybacking off of what Ricardo said, I'm trying to, especially now with an active EDI task force, and we're actively coming up with actionable items and what initiatives that we want to get started. And I'm grateful that our firm is pursuing those items and really thinking about them at the board level, not just at the grassroots level, but we're taking these to the CEO, the HR director, our legal counsel. Everyone is involved in these conversations. But trying to find a balance between being, the token, but also being outspoken, but also remembering that, again, there's a deadline next Friday and I need to get this project done. It's like, I need to focus on, where, what I was hired to do. And so what I would really like to look forward to, not just for my firm, but other firms of our size, is to really start to bring on a a designated person who focuses on these issues full time, that it's not something that we're trying to find in our spare time when we can, but if it's really something that we're passionate about, this is something that it's constantly brought up at board meetings and studio leadership meetings, that because of the demographics, there's no one like us sitting at that table right now. And it's going to be a couple years before, we will have that level of diverse leadership. So until we get to that point, what are we going to do to kind of be the bridge to get there? And I always like to refer back to Pascal Sablon of Beyond the Built, who mentions, we can be experts in so many different topics aside from being Black. We're experts in sustainability, construction codes, construction documents, design. We're excellent architects if we go, just beyond that. And so kind of the last thing, just like what we can do. As bad as the situation of COVID-19 has been, I think this is being forced to be inside is exactly what was necessary for everyone to stop and take notice. Otherwise, this topic would have just swept under the rug like it does every time there's a shooting of an unarmed Black man or woman in the streets. It's hot for like 2 weeks and then it's on to the next one until the next thing happens. So now that we can't really escape it, it's interesting to see people who, are in the position of the majority now have to pay attention. And, I'm very inspired, and I'm happy to see a lot of my colleagues, my friends who are educating themselves, who are trying to learn more, who are trying to figure out what it is that we can do. But it's unfortunate that it took a pandemic to kind of get to this point. And, I guess the last thing that I'll kind of leave with is, for those of us who are in kind of larger firms, encouraging and ensuring that, this dynamic, this social change is addressed among all levels of the firm. So again, I mentioned that at HCM, we have from the CEOs and the HR directors sitting in on our meetings, but also the principals, the project managers, the associates, the senior associates, everyone needs to be involved in the conversation. It can't just be a grassroots and the top level. It's gotta, seamlessly connect across all the levels of the firm. And so I think those are all the points I've been writing like viciously all day about the different points I wanted to hit, but yeah, I think I've been licensed for a little over 2 years now, and I'm looking forward to continuing to make a name for myself, not just as a Black architect, but as an architect who also just happens to be a great Black woman as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we have a really good question from the audience I wanted to bring up. Someone asked, what is NOMA doing to mentor young Black students so they don't drop out in the first year of school? Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so one of the many hats I wear is also the university liaison for the Northeast region. And so I'm engaged with a lot of our students across the area. So the first thing I can say is you can't really achieve that mentorship unless you get involved in NOMA. I know a lot of students who kind of come to a few of the meetings, but don't really get to see that engagement. Continuing to stay engaged beyond the design competition. The design competition is great. It's a great way to get involved and get in front of some great, really talented designers. But reach out to your local professional chapter, whether it be in your school's region, or if you're like me who went to school in the middle of a rural Pennsylvania region, referring back to your home area, which for me was DC NOMA. And so the professionals at the local level are really where you're going to find the most benefit, the most direct interaction with mentorship. As far as continuing through the profession, we did recently announce or recently introduce the NOMA Foundation Fellowship, which this year we were able to place 28 students at some of the AIA large firm roundtable members across the country for a virtual research experience or internship. And at first we had only kept this to graduating seniors, but people weren't applying, so we expanded it to the third year and up, which has really been kind of just a great experience to try to get exposure for these students, not just within the NOMA community, but also within these larger firms that the students are trying to break into. So long answer, but I promote, getting in touch with your local NOMA chapter. The name of the fellowship, Yasmin, is the NOMA Foundation Fellowship. Right now we're only doing it in the summer. So, we can have a whole separate conversation about how it was derailed by COVID and it went to a virtual fellowship. But next year we're hoping to be able to bring it back as an in-person fellowship to truly be an internship experience.
Yeah. I had a question for something that you said earlier that really stuck with me. You had said that it's not enough to hire Black architects and designers, you have to cultivate them.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just curious if you could expand on that, because that's a great way to put it, and I'd love to know more.
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of colleagues who have come into firms and they're kind of thrown into a project, and the project manager assumes that they know Revit, that they know AutoCAD, that they get hired and there's a deadline in 2 weeks, and for some reason they can't meet it, but it was a new hire. And because of, I don't know if it's just for some reason being held to a higher standard or a lower standard, and they feel like they can't meet that, automatically it's assumed that they cannot achieve more, and so they have to go. And then when that particular hire does not work out, the whole demographic is ruined. We can't hire another Black man because that one we hired 2 years ago didn't make it. And so whether it's like taking them aside and just continuing to mentor them, just like you would any person who looks like you, it doesn't have to be a Black person in a higher position at the firm. It could be anybody, just realizing that, they need some guidance. We're all coming out of school with no work experience or minimal work experience. Some of us have had internships, some of us have not. And even with those internships, it's been very limited exposure to like working, for example, in a Revit model within a professional setting. So I think just understanding that not only are there, there's a little bit more guidance that needs to come into play for students who are coming out of school, as they transition into the professional setting, but also that everyone's situations are different. I had one friend who, unfortunately, things did not work out with the firm, but they wanted her to work all these late hours, and no one, spent the time to figure that out and see why it was that she wasn't making the deadlines. And so being able to ask those questions and reach out and care, about each individual person really goes a long way. And so for me, I make it a habit to, not just interact with my project manager directly, but like my studio leader, my CEO, like I'm reaching out and I'm talking to everybody within my firm, because I know that I can learn from everybody within that practice.
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, no, that's great. Did anyone like to add anything else to that? We have 4 minutes. Julia?
I can add. Yeah, I like what you said, Melanie, about kind of assessing individual experiences within the workplace in cultivating people, so you're setting them up for success. And I also think academia is also a part of that. I think that there's not enough Black professors, and I don't think that Revit is the standard of what they're teaching in schools right now. as a transition into professional practice, but then also having emotional intelligence for the, for the project team that you're working with. I think in the case of like a single mother, you need to understand what are the boundaries of time and limit, and that goes for all coworkers and staff. So I think part of it is getting away from this kind of like toxic culture of like architecture and like this tortured artist thing and a one size fits all, and really getting down to kind of like who are the people that are working for you or working at the company, and then what is the purpose? Like, why are they there? What is their individual motivator to be there? And then how can you tap into that thing to create a better project or whatever you're working on? And I think that was a great point that you had, Melanie.
Thanks.
Yeah, and that's just general caring about your employees, right? But I feel like so many people are wrapped up in the next deadline, especially like project managers who have a lot on their plates, that tends to get missed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just checking yourself and making sure that, you're paying attention to your employees because they need you, especially whenever they're not experienced and you don't know what their situation is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So Julia and Marcia, which one of you two would like to go?
I can go.
Okay. 20 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I have a lot of things, and I also wrote notes too, Melody. So you'll probably see me like looking down a little bit. Most people who know me know that I can kind of talk their ear off about anything. So, but I think if we're going back to kind of like, kind of what is the catalyst for these conversations now, it is essentially, Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Not mattering, and us kind of having to deal with the hurt and the pain of that, and then the uprisings and the protesting and doing that alongside being a designer and architect and working kind of like your 9 to 5, right? And I think for me it starts at like a human level, like people who look like us, who are unarmed and aren't doing anything, are losing their lives. So I think the weight of that is very heavy. And I think people understood that a couple of weeks ago, but I think it's still very much prominent, like for us. And so I think it's important to continue to state that, and in ways that kind of like shows up in trauma, and in ways that we're dealing with that through work. I think that's important to highlight. And also protesting and COVID going on at the same time. Black people are choosing to put their own health at risk to be out in the streets to protest for fighting, for their freedom to exist, So, and, I was featured in Architect magazine like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. And one of the things that I said in it was that I am Black first and I'm a designer second, right? So I think that, sorry. So I think those in parallel kind of inform the way that we are moving kind of like in this space right now. And I think it's important that people understand that even now. And I think the whole world is kind of like, protesting or an acknowledgement of this. So I think when we're going back to the statements of companies kind of being in solidarity, we really want to see what that looks like, because that's really like what our life is. I'm not saying every day we're going into the office is like hell and like this is the worst thing, but there are times when we are less productive. There's times when we are more productive. There's times when we're more sad, and some people are directly affected, some people are not. So it's kind of like a level of engagement thing, number one. And then number two, it's also thinking about how are we really, holding space for those people in those spaces. It's even before, the uprisings, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, even in the workplace, you know, we behave differently, right? We try to make sure that people are comfortable with our existence, or we're probably overly cheerful. We want to make sure that we're making a good impression, like we're doing the code switching, like we're doing all of that stuff because we have the skill set. But then there's also the implicit bias of people that believe that we don't, we can't, you know, do the work or at a certain capacity. So there is that. And then there's also the emotional weight of doing that every day. You know what I mean? So even without kind of the extra weight of what's going on right now, there's still an underlying kind of like extra effort. And I don't want to speak for everyone, but I feel like there's an extra effort within professional practice that you don't necessarily see. You know what I mean? And then traumatic things also happen in the office, and we have to hold that with us. And just because we look good holding it doesn't mean it's not heavy. You know what I mean? So I think that in that way, it is kind of like important for us to be able to talk about these things, and with people that we feel are allies, that can kind of like understand that. And it's not saying like boohoo, like woe is me. It's just saying that there are extra elements that we're kind of going through before we get to work, then we're at work, and then after we leave work, we're still like that Black person, you know what I mean? So I kind of just wanted to start with that as a primer. And then go back, because Melanie was kind of talking about her kind of like first entry into architecture. Her father was an architect, and I always tell people that I was 12 when I knew that I wanted to be an architect, as much as a 12-year-old can understand what an architect is. And I'm from Sacramento, and I grew up in a predominantly white, you know, city or area, and I, you know, was never not aware of my like otherness, and I was very cognizant of kind of like my environment, and knowing that I like went to a high school that had like drafting. So I did drafting for 3 years as an elective. You know, I had sculpting and 3D visual arts classes. So I had the opportunity to kind of explore my interest. And I knew then that that isn't something that's always afforded to people that look like me. So I always felt that it is important to understand kind of like passion and purpose in the context of that. So I kind of look at, you know, architecture and design and kind of like the experience of Black designers kind of through the lens of like the pipeline, which is like something NOMA also captures in their programming, Project Pipeline, which is like the architecture summer camp, but then also the pipeline as your first exposure to architecture all the way through retirement, you know what I mean? So I think so that first kind of like pinch point, most people probably aren't exposed to architecture that early on, or maybe they are, but really when we're talking about getting from high school to college, and Melanie talking about the barriers to entry even there, and even not having support in your classes or whatever it may be, I think it's important to think about where are the areas that need support along each pinch point. And I think a lot of the times it is financial, and it's not always financial, but then if you're also thinking about students in school, you know, some people have to have a job and work at the same time. And a lot of the times studio professors will critique you on the amount of time that you have spent on projects or the level of effort. And it's mostly people of color. And I'm not saying it's no white people like have other jobs or have different situations, but a lot of the time you're seeing us kind of holding down a job and studio and maybe something else. So I'm just thinking about that in terms of barriers of, you know, being in a university system. And then there's also, and I think in the first installment, there was conversations about the difference between HBCUs and PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and how that varies in your level of education and support from your professors, and how seriously people take you depending on your, you know, what school that you went to. And it does not necessarily indicator of how well of an education that you got. But then that's also kind of a barrier as well when you're graduating. And in terms of recruiting. But then even outside of recruiting, I think the architecture academia in architecture is so rigorous and not reflective of professional practice that a lot of people go through the program and then they drop. Like, we're losing people after that. I think, well, when I was in school, it was me and then one other Dominican girl and an Ethiopian girl. So we were the only three. And there wasn't any Black men like above or below. I don't think, maybe one. But the representation wasn't there. But I'm just thinking about overall kind of the pinch points of, you know, your first exposure, high school, college, getting out, and then entry level. What does that look like? Doing your IDP, AXP, are you getting exposure to different projects and things that you need to be on in your professional practice? My experience is largely in large corporate. So I don't have the, you know, knowledge base of being in like a medium size or a small size firm where maybe you can have more, you know, autonomy or multiple hands and things. But I think there's also barriers in that. So I think for me, one of the things, and just because I'm super extroverted anyway, is I decided that I would like to be involved in as many things that I can kind of get my hands on to be able to be more impactful outside of the office, inside the office, but then also outside of the office. So currently right now I am involved with the local San Francisco chapter of AIA. I'm on the mentorship committee right now, and I also have my own mentorship group, as well as the professional practice committee. And there I do a lot of communications work, and then also planning events and programming. But then also, you know, the local San Francisco Bay Area NOMA chapter, which is fantastic. We are hosting this year's NOMA National Conference. Woo woo, my NOMA people, as you guys know. So just being integral and kind of thinking about how are we pushing the narrative and in these times. And just a little plug, the theme is spatial shifts, reclaiming our cities. And worked with our president, June Grant, who may be on the call, and Prescott Rivas, who's amazing, on this theme, and really talking about what is the role of the architect in these times, and how are we really, you know, making, you know, more equitable communities for ourselves. So heavily involved in NOMA, and I know Melanie is kicking butt on the national level. So a lot of work there for the past couple of years. Amongst, you know, other, you know, events, being on planning committees for symposiums and events, and moderating and being a speaker, because I really feel like being a voice in this space is important, especially for the Bay Area, which people think is really diverse. It is. I mean, California is a lot more diverse than other places, but it really, you know, isn't that diverse. So I think me kind of like being in that space is also purposeful and impactful. So I think if we're talking about workplace and kind of like how well we're doing, I think that there is a genuine there's a genuine interest to do better from companies, you know, that have created the Black Lives Matter statements or in response to. But then we also have, you know, the Black at AIAs, the Black at SOMs, the Black at Genslers, the Black at whatevers now that are popping up everywhere, you know. So we're seeing firsthand from anonymous, you know, submittals of people's experiences within workplaces, right? So I think when that happens kind of like in opposition to what the statements say, then there's real work to be done, you know, in those spaces. And there's real kind of like actionable and trackable things that we could be doing. And I can get into that as well. How am I doing on time? How am I doing on time? Oh,
we have, sorry, 7 minutes. I was on mute.
Oh, okay. So what was I going to say? Well, I think it's interesting because You know, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not that, you know, seasoned in the profession, I guess, but, you know, it's been like 50 years since Whitney M. Young's speech, you know, at AIA in Portland, and kind of challenging, you know, people of the industry to diversify and really, you know, take that on and be committed to that initiative. And I'm not sure how much we've moved the needle since then. And if we think about, you know, architecture traditionally, it's been a very kind of like elitist profession that is performed for people who have, you know, the assets to have an architect. And I think when we talk about, you know, the canons of architecture and, you know, protecting, you know, the safety, welfare of, you know, the public, you know, it's kind of like said in this humanitarian kind of like ethos, right? So kind of thinking about how are we blending those two, and how does equity and inclusion kind of like weave and integrate into those things. And I think that's what hopefully everyone on this panel and those watching are really passionate about, and kind of like saying, well, what are those things, and how are we authentic in bringing those things to the table, to where we're not just like talking the talk, but we're really walking the walk. I think that's also a good point to make. And then if we're getting into the next part of the pipeline of, you know, middle management, or like getting into senior leadership, there's also barriers to entry there, right? If we're talking about like, what are the actual criteria to elevate? Are those things transparent in your offices or in your workplace? If you need to do A, B, and C, is that known? Are you given the opportunity to do A, B, and C if that's the requirement? Are people overlooked? And I often find that a lot of people of color, and specifically Black people, I've seen, because I do this thing where I just like message people on LinkedIn, you know, I just like connecting. But even just looking, you know, at people's profiles and seeing that someone's been somewhere for like 15 years and they're only an associate, right? I think that it takes us longer to get the accolades or the credit that we deserve to be in the spaces that we need to be the lead on this project, or to kind of push initiatives in the first place. So that's also another barrier to entry. When you're mid-management, you're kind of upper, and then our numbers are dwindling. So then how much autonomy or how much influence do we have in this space? And I think when we're, you know, mid to kind of like entry level in this space currently, we are looking for those people who are already there to kind of be doing the lift as we climb thing. But then we also need to assess, where are they, and like, how can we help them, right? And I think it also comes from, you know, allies that are non-Black or non-BIPOC. And I really do like to talk about allyship in that way, because I think that is really how the work gets done right now. And that's why I think there was a lot of backlash, or a lot of people being vocal about the statements, or even like the Black squares on like Instagram, because it's like performative allyship, and that's not what we asked for. Like, you know, the Black Lives Matter on the streets, very powerful, very purposeful, but we're still not defunding the police. I'm not trying to be political, but I'm just saying we're not getting the things that you're asking for. You're just showing us performative things to pacify us, right? So we really want that allyship when you know, there's, you know, considerations for promotions. If you really think that you really liked working with this person, or they did a good job, we need people to speak up for us in the rooms that we're not in, right? Like, we want to be in the room where it happens, you know, quoting Hamilton, but we're not. So we need the people to be the allies, the real allies, to be in those spaces for us and working with us in partnership to do those things. So I think I'm like close on time, so I'm going to scroll down, and I'm just going to say the things that we can do very quickly. And these are kind of like very short. They could be, you know, expanded upon, but I would say amplify Black voices, place Black architects in design roles and design leads. Don't stick us only in the technical roles. Be an ally, be an active ally, not a performative ally. If you have an EDI or ERG at your company, give us funding for the things that we're doing. Commit to the service. We want to see you here in 3 months. We want to see you here in 6 months. We want to see you here next year. For us, it's not a moment, it's a movement. So we really need to see that from you guys who are allies. Do your homework. Like, we don't want to be teaching you all the time. It's not because we don't want to, it's because we're tired. Like, it's our lived experience. So we kind of just need you to do a little bit of homework so then you have a little bit of reference when you want to engage. Promise, like, we don't bite. And then partner with, you know, Black-led or Black-owned practices. And I think if you don't have leadership already that are people of color. And then the last thing is expand your network and your genuine relationships. I think if we're talking about recruiting and even outside of recruiting, if your network is all white people, you're not going to know where to find people of color, right? So you need to diversify the people that you know in general. You need to be curious about what other people do. So then when, you know, an opportunity arises or you think of something that could be interesting, then you're not only thinking about, you know, the people that you've always talked to. But I think that's probably my time. And like I said, I could talk way more about anything, but I'm a pause. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's
Yeah.
all great.
Amazing.
It's all great
That's
things.
good. I think people want you to run for office, so you need to decide what you're doing, or maybe we need to make a call to.
Well, I guess I can on my iPad now.
Oh yeah, we have
Biden,
yes.
seconds and
Georgia
thirds.
said architecture is political, and it is Georgia Sarkin. Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. There was one question from Jessica Gardenhire, who was one of the participants in the last round. What's up, Jessica? She said,
yes.
if we architects play the role of humanitarian protectors of safety and well-being, that title is a mouthful, and it just gives me a headache thinking about it. Do you feel as if we have power to make change? And then she said, architects, she goes on to say, architects in general, as well as Black architects, what I experience is that it's the developer / client with all the power. And that is a very, very true statement.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your response to that.
Oh, well, I feel like everyone could also answer this question too, because, you know, but I mean, I think that's very true. I think the architect is the middle of the equation of the built environment. Like, it doesn't start with us and it doesn't end with us, right? So then I think that if we're talking about, you know, clients, like, we also need to diversify who our clients are and what types of projects that we choose to engage in. I think that's number one. And then number two, I think we also need to push clients, existing clients that we already have, or new clients that are still in the same demographic as what is traditionally, you know, pursued, and just kind of like push them a little bit, like with your ethos or your design philosophy, right? Maybe you can slip, you know, something in, you know, and also contracts, you know, you could be a little tricky with contracts as well. But I definitely agree it's a hard thing to think about, the level or how much power an architect really has in the work that they're doing, because architecture is a service at the end of the day. It is a creative endeavor, but it is a service. So yeah, I mean, my short, I guess, like, two answers, and I'd like to kick it over to, you know, other people too, would be diversify your clients, and then also challenge your clients, your existing clients, on things that can be beneficial to, you know, the end users, the general public, something that also benefits the world.
Yeah, I'll add to that and say it's also the policy. So, like,
Yes.
if unfortunately we our hands are kind of tied when the client comes to us, and if we choose to engage in that project, like, what they ask is what they get, and we can guide them in the right direction. But at the end of the day, if we see a problem with luxury apartments going up in place of low income or subsidized housing without any replacements, that's a policy issue. So one thing that I've learned in the last year, with kind of refocusing more on social justice, is that we need to be more active on the policy side as well, and speak out and vote. Please vote. Oh my God, please vote. Vote 2020 November.
Please, please.
Absolutely. And actually, if you're ending, if by the time the billing is gone up, it's actually too late to make any policy changes. You know, I've been involved in a few, especially in Miami when they were doing the renovations in Liberty City. I worked for one of the architects who was, you know, cultivating a relationship with the developer who later won the proposal. And I had a girlfriend who was also a part of the political arm. And it was a multifaceted approach to handle a project that was slated to replace what was one of the first Black designated housing developments. I think it was in the US, I'll be safe to say in Florida, Liberty City. And it was a multifaceted approach from the developers, from the government, from the architect, and they had to, and also the community leaders. So dealing with projects like that, where you are going to be focused on, we're talking about changing the client or a little bit more focused towards certain types of projects, you have to actually be in negotiating from the very beginning, even before anything gets built. And so you would have to be a part of the process, the political process. You would have to be a part of the community engagement process. You would have to be a part of formulating some of the requirements for the developers. So what was done in Liberty City, of which one of my good friends, she was working with one of the political arm, was that they negotiated certain things to be a part of the housing contract that did include favorable housing assignments and allocations to the owner, to the previous residents. Also facilitated funding, so there was a bank involved. Also facilitated training and community development programs so that they could not only get loans to purchase and own some of the properties, but also maintain it. So it was a multifaceted approach. You had to get in on the very beginning, because once the developer got awarded that contract, there's no negotiations. He got his millions of dollars, and there's no sensitivity to the needs of the community that you absolutely want this to benefit. So, and I was privileged to see that and be a part of that. And I was also privileged to see the development in Overtown. And it was two different models that was happening. And I actually preferred what happened in Liberty City. And I actually encourage everyone to study a little, not just look at the pretty buildings. And I think that's what we end up doing as architects. We look at the buildings, we look at the floor plans, we look at what's going on. I've been a little bit more involved on the community development side, community engagement side, what's happening in terms of cultural development, and how cities and CRAs, I've also been privileged to sitting in a few meetings. And this is at the front end. This is even before any contract is awarded to any architect or to any developer, where you were talking previously about funding. You would have to look at where the funding is allocated. And my mantra has always been, and I hate saying the word mantra, so let me come back. But I always say, follow the money. And especially with what's happening now, I'm not a political person. The movement that's going on for me, I'm very much personally involved, of course, because I'm a mother, I have 3 sons. I'm a Black woman, and I've had encounters, so, and then I'm in a profession where I'm not represented, and I'm also an immigrant. So I have a lot of things that I am very conscious of. I'm not bitter, I'm not angry or anything like that, but I'm conscious of things like that. But I'm also conscious on an economic level. I do work a lot in the luxury department, in the luxury field, and somehow got involved in community engagement. And I started to watch certain things. The money. You got to watch where the money goes. If we want certain developments and certain types of projects, get into when they're having the meetings, get into when they're allocating the funds. voting is one thing, but on the local level, there are votes that's going on, you know, and in terms of the communities and building certain types of projects in certain types of communities, I sat in a meeting, and it was a predominantly Black area, and everybody was arguing, they were upset, it's a CRA meeting, those can get pretty heated, guys. It's a CRA meeting, it's about money, it's about land, it's about development in the community and who gets what projects. And I'm sitting down in the meeting, and I was there with a client who was a white client, and she was trying to get the CRA money because she wanted to build a particular project, and she was very much on top of her game. I, in fact, learned a lot from her, very much on top of her game with getting funding, with grants, federal funding, applications, all of that, of which a lot of us don't know and a lot of us aren't involved in. But I sat in this CRA meeting, and the community associations were also in that meeting. The heads of the CRA was also in the meeting. My clients and other architects and other developers who all wanted to see how they could get a piece of this $10 million allocated funds that had to be spent. And if it wasn't spent, it would go back to federal government. So again, follow the money. And I said to the associations, because in one small area in Fort Lauderdale, there were 27 associations. And I said to them, why didn't you guys all just come together, hire an architect or a planner, come up with what you want to see for your city, and then pitch it to the CRA and tell them where you want to go. I said, you're not talking their language. They're not hearing you, So in terms of architecture being political, voting is one thing, but getting in on the community level, getting in on the projects that gets built in the communities. There was a huge uproar because they tore down, they decided to give the YMCA, the CRA gave the YMCA organization a building that was the first Black hospital in Fort Lauderdale, and they tore that building down to build a YMCA because it was for the community. But we're saying, no, but this has cultural and historical value. The first Black doctor, all these babies, and in that site, couldn't we have found, we looked at the map of the CRA that showed all of the properties. Couldn't you have give them another location? So there's all of that that's going on. And I believe that we all have different parts to play. We all have different experiences and different understandings. But I would absolutely say, if you step away from the emotions, because I know as architects, we're very logical and we're very practical and we're all solutionists. But if you step away from the emotions and start watching where the money goes, that is a lot more power than even any of the political things that's going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Keep going, don't stop.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well,
Keep
so
going,
guys,
don't stop. Yeah,
so
I mean,
guys,
yeah.
Yeah, so we're gonna, so we are on a time schedule, so that we have enough time. You can just continue.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, we'll stop we'll stop in about 18 minutes.
Yeah, just tell me when to stop.
Yep. So go ahead.
I'm not a
Floor is
talker
yours.
and I have notes, so I'll hit my main points.
Yep. Go for it.
So so hi everyone. Again, I'm Marsha McDonald. I've had the privilege and the honor of having varied experiences with regards to architecture. I'm probably one of the, people say that I'm very diverse and very, I've had my hands in many experiences, and and if I'm going to share a little bit about my journey, and that would explain it a little bit. I am from Jamaica, and I did my bachelor's degree in architecture at the Caribbean School of Architecture in Kingston, Jamaica. And there's some people who are probably here too. I saw some people joining in. So essentially, I found out about architecture because there's this thing in Jamaica where you had to pick your subjects once you were 13 and you're going on to pick your common entrance, your CXCs. It's an exam that we do similar to APs, but a little bit more intense. And I did a career study, those evaluations. And they said I could only be two professions. I would be great as an architect, or hairdresser. Go figure. and, and so I said, well, my mom would kill me. She spent all this money for me to go to school. I can't pick being a hairdresser. I might as well pick being an architect, which is what I did. And at 13 years old, I decided I needed to figure out about this whole business of architecture. I never knew what an architect was. I had no experience about that. And so I just said, okay, if architecture is about building, let me find out about this architecture. And I found the favorite building that I loved. And I found an architect who did it. And I called him up and I said, hey, I want to work for you because I need to learn about architecture. And he took me up on his offer. And even to this day, we're still good friends. And I have a meeting with him this week just to catch up. And, and so the importance, and I'll just stick up in there, there's that importance of mentoring and that importance of relationships to develop your journey in architecture. And it's been a walk of relationships for me. I ended up going to do my bachelor's, and while I was there, also encountered this thing that I never thought about. Everybody in my class was Black. All my teachers were Black, and gave it no second thought. And I only gave it a second thought when I moved here later on to do my master's, and found out that I was the only Black person in two. There was only 2 Black people in my class, and I was the only female. And for the first time, I encountered this strangeness where my race became an issue. In Jamaica, I worked for a female architect. There was a female head of the school, and and I'm still friends with that female architect. I think I saw her here on the line. And I did historic preservation. She, did a lot of work with UNESCO and throughout the Caribbean and doing historic preservation. And she was very much into this whole thing of cultural production and representation in terms of our space. Got here to Florida and took a 10-year hiatus. So I was one of those who fell off the wagon. In fact, anybody who met me from Jamaica, who knew me from Jamaica, saw me what was going on in Florida, and I said, well, I got married and I had a few children. I did try to jump into the profession when I got here to get some jobs, and that was when I recognized that my race was an issue. I was in Florida, and there was no NOMA. The AIA was, kind of foreign to me. I didn't think to join it. And I got a job working with a contractor and really got into the luxury market and was doing high-end luxury homes as an interior designer, because they said, if you knew AutoCAD, you can definitely do this. And decided after my 3rd child that I was going to go back to school, and I'm going to pursue my dream of being an architect. And so I showed up in school pregnant and had all my professors looking at me as if I was crazy. And I said, no, I'll be fine. I'll just have the baby and you'll see me in a few more weeks. And literally that's what I did. But the good thing about that was my journey is not a typical journey. I later stayed on and did another master's because I said, I wanted to research culture, community, wanted to understand, because my experiences in school was very interesting. When I wanted to talk about diversity and wanted to talk about culture, my professor says that doesn't belong in architecture. And I was at a Hispanic, predominantly Hispanic university at Florida FIU. And so I said, well, but we're in the middle of South Florida, where culture and diversity is at a higher percentage than if I were, in the North, And so I started looking around a little bit more and got some interesting opportunities to study Miami and study what was going on in Miami. And did my presentations, did my exhibitions, and and kind of got my degrees and tried to figure out how to jump back in the profession. And I had a problem. That one, I had a gap in my education, and I also was a mom. So the architecture culture didn't facilitate me. So what I did was I literally did what any any I don't know, maybe it's just my mind. I just opened a company, and I said, well, what can I do? And I opened a studio, and I was a freelancer and partnered with whoever needed design services. And so I did that for a while, then got into the nonprofit space, and also as a consultant for a few clients. And that's how I got the experience to being, in CRA meetings, because they needed someone who was knowledgeable about the process. They had money to spend, and it was kind of like an owner's rep scenario. So I did that, and started figuring out that, the whole thing about following the money. Where was the money being spent? How was it being spent in the communities? And I'm sitting on these board meetings, and I'm sitting on these CRA meetings, and I'm sitting in these community engagement meetings. And I said, well, I said, we don't have any architects. I didn't know any. And so I decided to, in 2016, to start up a community initiative and called Diversity in Design, Arts, and Architecture, and to educate my community about architecture. I started going to the schools and participating in career days. I started reaching out to different architects, different firms, and invited them to participate. And I started doing these annual talks on Black architecture, Black arts, Black design, women in architecture, and just completed an e-summit on Caribbean resiliency, where I invited a few friends from the Caribbean, few friends here, architects, designers, and they showed up from all over the world. And I had about over 100 people. So essentially, that journey led me to these conclusions: that we're all solutionists, and I know emotions are high. I have a 6'2" tall 16-year-old who, if anybody sees him right now, would think that he's 20 something. He has the attitude of a man, but nobody's going to stop and say, oh, he's just a teenager. And I have 2 more sons coming up behind him. I have artistic children, not autistic, but artistic in the sense that they are creative, and they can design, and they can spatialize and create worlds in Minecraft and Fortnite like nobody's business. But they're in an environment where they're not being encouraged to be creative, when art and design is not being encouraged as a career for them. They're in an environment where just by how they look, they're going to be stopped. And I've actually already, for my 16-year-old, have had to deal with the law. And not for something he did. He was with a group of people, including white kids, and he was the one that they tagged, and I had to be in front of a judge with something that could have been, hey, you know what, just cross the street on the crosswalk. So I've had these experiences. I've had the experience of going to an interview as for a luxury, an architect who does mainly with multi-million-dollar homes, who loved my portfolio. I passed everyone, got up to do the interview, and he met me and realized that this was a Black woman who did this work, and basically told me I don't fit his firm. So I've had these experiences, but I've come to the conclusion that if I get emotional, then I am relegated in a space that doesn't produce solutions. And I'm a solutionist, and we all are. So here are my propositions. We have a funnel problem. Right now, we're at 3% in the US for Black architects, male and female. If you move that 3% another dot, we're at 0.3%, that's about how many female architects, Black architects there are. If you move that dot once more, 0.03, that's about how many professors that are Black that are in the schools. Those are the numbers, just 3.3 and 0.03, easy to remember. How do we fix the funnel? Our funnel, we have two areas where we're losing people. And this is after study and looking at statistics and looking at what's going on. And we're all trying to fix something. We can issue the statements, but the statements only say one thing on the surface. But I think everybody else is wanting now something a little bit more actionable. So here's some of the solutions that I've seen. At the high school level, they're not presented with architecture as a viable career. If you want to get down to the numbers, and I taught numbers, just go to just say to them, how much would you work if you start working at McDonald's? Oh, minimum wage, you know. I said the entry level hourly wage, if you learn how to design and if you learn how to do drafting, is what? And give them those numbers. Start having people think, oh, wait a minute, I'll get more? Yeah. So all that time I'm spending doing the video games, I can learn how to do SketchUp and learn how to draw? Absolutely. And get an entry-level job that starts higher than working at Mickey D's? Absolutely. Those are some numbers that people will find real. The students respond to those numbers. And also the fact that they have ideas and they are strong ideas about their space and about their world. And they're living in spaces that have been designed for them by other people. And so I introduced the idea, well, what if you could design your own space? You know, get out of the virtual space and start designing some real spaces. Well, how can I do that, miss? Well, learn how to become an architect, a designer, and you can start changing your own space. You don't always have to wait for someone to design it for you. Okay, that's two. And I have a few more, but if you jump into, and this is the next part of the funnel. So now they have gotten into some of the colleges. A lot of our students are not being educated as to where the money is. We have a money problem, right? Architecture is expensive. White, black, brown, everybody says the same thing. Architecture is expensive. It takes a lot of you out of you in terms of time, money, resources, correct? So how do we fix it? Well, why don't we find out the schools that have the money to give for our students and let them know where they are? Oh, let's go to an HBCU and stuff. Yes, but you can go to an HBCU and still not have the funds to stay in the program. So broaden your perspective, apply to the HBCU and apply to the others that would have the money to fund you. I got funded throughout my school because I learned when I was in high school, when I was doing my SATs, I learned where the money is. And I only applied to schools that had the funds that would fund me, that follow the money. And then once you get into that, align yourself to organizations that will support your progress throughout. I've found that my jumping back into the space, I needed to align myself a little bit more to organizations. So at the time, Florida did not have a NOMA. They've just started, and I've met the NOMA. Yeah, they just started. So I'm meeting a couple of these guys and I'm starting up to go to the meeting, and then COVID happened. So those are some of the things, because essentially we need to elevate the conversation. That means increase the knowledge that's out there. They don't know about the profession, especially in communities. They don't think of architecture as a viable profession because they don't know about it. We need to talk about engagement. Wherever you are in the funnel, I know architects who, I have a friend, she's a Black female architect, and she doesn't go out. She doesn't go into the networking space. I said, why don't you? We need to see your face, because the students need to know that there are Black architects out there. You know, I'm talking as a designer. I can't say I'm an architect. I'm not yet an architect. I can only say I'm trained as one. But imagine if after all that work, you go back to the schools and you start talking about your experience as being an architect. And then the education. So, I'm sorry, representation wherever you are in the funnel. A lot of us are stuck in spaces where, and it was mentioned before, for 15 years, 10 years. I mean, I can't imagine working for someone for 10 years and not being a business owner. And maybe because My dad is an entrepreneur, maybe because, that's how I am. But where are you going to start your firm? If you've worked for 10 years, 10 years, when are you going to start your firm? Are you waiting for like I have this thing of, I know how to build a table. So I can build a table and I can invite people to join my table, which is why I did the events, because I wasn't being invited to be on panels and I wasn't being invited to be in events. And I said, okay, well, I'm in my community. Let's call up a few people. Hey, we're going to do this. And we did it. So that proactiveness is needed amongst those who are at certain levels in the funnel. And I was talking with one of the NOMA president in Florida about that, because he's involved. He's doing quite a bit. So the other thing is, we're not where the funding is. We're not making the decisions in terms of the funding and the policy making. So that's why I know that I'm going to go straight to the PhD level, because there are hardly any Blacks on the PhD level. There's a lot of encouragement if you get there. There's a lot, even Harvard says, hey, we need underrepresented groups to be there, but we haven't been applying.
Oh man, I hope we didn't lose her. Her message was so
Just
hot.
that good. The talk was just that good that Zoom couldn't take it.
Exactly. it was
no one else was gonna say it, so I had to say
it. It was too much. Oh man, that was good. She was saying a lot of good things. I hope everybody heard that.
Oh, I was taking notes.
Yeah, because her perspective is different. Obviously, she's not younger as far as that's concerned, and she's been around the block and seen a lot of things. And I think I think that perspective is important. And I think one of the things that everybody needs to be reminded of on this call, especially, is that maybe you haven't designed a ton of stuff like some of your peers have or some of the leaders in your firm have, but you still have the capability to have a seat at the table. And I think for so often we're like, again, we're walking around like Oliver, like, more please. And it's like, no, you need to call it out and be like, I want to be up there. And I think part of it is just having that gumption and that drive to just say, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to let anybody tell me that I can't. And as a matter of fact, my advice is simply, and has always been, keep doing it until somebody tells you and tells you not to. And at that point, more often than not, that's not going to happen. And so I would just encourage you guys to really get out there, and the relationships are key. Everything that Marsha was talking about are all predicated upon relationships. It starts when you guys enter your architectural program in school. You need to really be developing those relationships, and it goes on from there. I mean, I wouldn't have made it through Howard without the relationships that I had. It was never what I knew. It was always who I knew that made the difference for me. So, but Marsha, we were just talking about you because we were saying you were dropping it so hot that the Zoom universe just you out of it. So,
too hot.
If you want to finish your thought, go ahead and do that, so we can wrap it up.
Yeah, no, the last, and I guess the main thing is we're talking about the problems, and I think we just need to focus as architects, which is just coming up with the solutions and start implementing, and at the levels that we can, and then invite people to join in something that we already have formulated. And I think I think once we do that, then we, we're, I'm going to say it, we're the masters of our universe, so to speak, and we're sharing.
Yeah. That's it.
Thank you, man.
Thanks, Marsha.
Powerful.
Yes.
Somebody said Julia and Marsha as running mates.
2020. Well, I think it's important. I mean, I think everyone has had like great points, and I would like to say I love this panel because we're kind of like bouncing off each other a lot. But I think a lot of what Marsha was saying was kind of like expanding the role of the architect, and like, what does the architect do? And if you're building your own table, like expand what that means. like to be an architect. I don't think it has to fit into this traditional kind of like sense of building and construction. It's that building that relationship. It's you know, having your ear to the ground. And I also think if you're someone who's in a large corporate structure or even not, I mean, I think us as Black designers are assets because we are in communities that they can't touch. Like we are in places that they can't reach on their own, right? So then we're also kind of that bridge in that way, you know what I mean? And then also talking about, you know, the intersectionality of it as well, because, you know, Black people, number one, are not a monolith, and then there's multiple identities that we hold, right? And I think we also need to be cognizant of that in the way that we approach design, in the way that we listen to people, and in community engagement meetings, not providing design before we fully understand what the needs are. I think Rodolfo had a comment about understanding kind of the design needs, and also I guess like building code and even like gender neutral restrooms, which is like something that I'm doing on a project of mine right now, and understanding what are ways that you're trying to push design and culture in that way. So you can be multiple things when you're the architect, right? You could be the magician, the facilitator, the listener, the drawer, the microphone, you know, to amplify other people's voices. So I really like what Marcia was saying, kind of like in that sense.
Yeah, I'm also going to have to say that, you know, that's one of the things that I enjoy being Afro-Latino, because I always tell people I'm Black first, because that's the first thing people are going to see. And, you know, I tell outside of work, one of the conversations that I've had was, even at the office, I said, you know, no matter how many accolades or how many articles I've been featured on, to my French, that shit doesn't matter when I leave the office after 5 o'clock. To anyone else out on the street, I'm just another Black man. They don't say, oh, there goes Ricardo, another Latino. No, the first thing they see is Black. So, and an unarmed Black man at that. But I think that there is power in being able, as Afro-Latino, being able to walk the world of an African-American or someone who's Black and a Latino, because I'm reminded of a panel discussion at TXA that we had in Galveston that was hosted by both Frail and Melvin McLemore. And Gabrielle Bullock was from Perkins and Will was on that panel, and so was Moody and Nolan. And one of the reasons that they lost the project was the Malcolm X project is because Moody and Nolan had the, they knew who their audience was, and they targeted so that, you know, they had all the Black folk up there front and center, whereas Perkins and Will failed at it. And, you know, as something that I mentioned to Gabrielle on our call a few weeks back, and she was like, oh yeah, I was so mad about that. We, you know, that whole thing of cultural competency that we have to continue to remind folks of, right? Because you can't go in there building in the Black community and you haven't even interacted with the folks there. You know, that's another reason why I believe in the role of a citizen architect and being involved on city boards and commissions. I served on the Latino commissions, and now I serve this year on the, or have a 4-year term on the Mexican American Cultural Center. And people are like, well, you're Black, you know, is there a conflict of interest there because you're not Mexican? I'm like, no, but I'm still a Latino, and that's a Latino center at the end of the day, right? Because we're pulling in cultures from different walks of life, and Latino isn't just one thing. Like, what, if you tell me that I'm Latino, what am I supposed to look like? A plate of white beans and rice? I mean, like, what does that mean, right? So that's, I just want to say that that's very important. I want to stress that cultural competency part of that. So very honored to be in this space with all of you tonight, because I just needed this in my life.
Can I just say one thing also with regards to involvement? Part of involvement is knowledge. You know, we don't know what the research is really saying. We don't know where the fund is going on. Do you know that there are certain funds that are allocated that there have to be certain percentages that has to be led by an African-American or firm? Do we know that? Do we know where the funding is allocated and where it should be spent? You know, so when you're involved with the research side of things and the policy side of things, then you start getting the information. And so, you know, especially with where things are allocated and how it should be spent.
And I work, just to piggyback on that, I work with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and they are crying, literally crying for more Black and brown architects and engineers. There's just not enough of them. I'm introducing them to people all across the country because there's just not enough. Even in a big city like New York, there's not enough. So, I mean, there are, like I said, I've been around this industry for 23 years now. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and we're just scratching the surface. And I think this whole situation that we're in, this whole social movement, really is a springboard or a launch pad into some bigger things that all of you guys can be doing. That's much different than how things have been in the past. And it looks like my screen froze up, but I hope you heard what I just said.
We heard you, Randy.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, your face is frozen.
Because I'm stuck. So.
You're back.
I think we're
All right, we're pushing up on 8:55, I think, Central Standard Time now. So want to be respectful of people's times.
yeah, I think we probably just. I think a lot of the questions were from really early on in the panel. So I think if you guys just want to, if you guys have anything else you want to bring up, or I think we might just skip the Q&A tonight.
There's no Q&A after Marsha's. I mean, she
It was a mic drop moment.
That's it.
That's the mic up moment. That's it.
Done.
If you didn't take your notes, listen to the recording after.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess to end, I just like, people are going to be watching at this point. You know, I'm sure if you haven't already seen it, but the Arc So White Instagram page that is calling out all the firms that came out with statements, and it's like, okay, but your board looks like this, your leadership looks like this, you know, your academic institutions as well, your student demographics look like this. And so I think the message tonight is like, you know, we're going to be watching, and we are looking forward to the actionable items and that change that's really going to push us to that goal of increasing and doubling the number of Black architects out there.
And one of the reasons I'm pushing more to be in academia is, or coursework or information that is being presented actually is void of knowledge of the work of African-American architects, designers, and the impact it has had on this nation. I mean, we've talked about Monticello and Thomas Jefferson to death, and there's quite a lot more information that's out there. And I think there's that integration that also needs to happen, and that reintegration of the knowledge and the restructuring of how, you know, the educational aspect is also needs to be addressed. Yeah.
That's a whole nother hero voice right there.
I know.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, you're good.
I was gonna say, I think, yeah, in academia, I think there needs to be a greater kind of contextual learning about the built environment in U.S. history, and there should be required reading of like The Color of Law and, you know, Dark Space, or the different books that kind of highlight, you know, the gaps in understanding of the built environment.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I was looking at Melanie's Arc So White master list. And I was
That's
like,
crazy.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, it's a lot.
It's hot, man. I was just like, what is going on?
Yeah.
It's a lot.
So everyone take that note.
Can you post the link? I can't find it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wait, I found it.
Yeah,
I'll post the link.
Yeah, you do that. That's where my mind was on. But thanks again. Someone said it's on Instagram. Yep, there it goes.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say, you know, one of the fights that I make as an HBCU graduate of Tuskegee University, the best HBCU in the land, is that we're all gonna say that.
Wait a minute.
Come on, everyone's gonna root for their HBCU. Let me have my moment, right?
I'll let that slide. I'll let that.
Is that, while we understand that there is a lack of resources at historically Black colleges and universities that differ from predominantly white institutions, one of the fights that I've been making is that there are diamonds in the rough, even though you may look at some of their work and be like, man, this looks like shit. But you may have that one diamond in the rough who may not be the best designer or architect, but can really work their ass off. And that's where I think goes to Melanie's point on recruitment and retention, and training that person up, right? And making sure that they have a seat at the table. Or if they feel like they don't have a seat at the table, be like Marsha, make your own table and invite people to it. So that's one of the things that I want to say from the HBCU front.
Is everybody on LinkedIn?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, because we have people asking.
Everyone's asking Marsha's LinkedIn. They're like, where are you at, girl? Where are you at, girl? Yeah, I think someone asked about like next steps. I mean, there's a plethora of like resources that could be shared. A lot of them can be Googled, but I would strongly encourage people to kind of look for, the amazing Black designers that are already doing really, really good work. And obviously we kind of like, within this group, we kind of have our favorites. We've already done a few shout outs and name drops. But really kind of like do the homework and really kind of like understand where all this is coming from. I think in multiple conversations, I'm always really hesitant to kind of talk about this only because I wonder like, what is the action item, or like, what are people really getting out of this? So I would hope that we could really challenge our allies to really be that kind of firm like support for us when we're moving forward.
I also put two names that I'm just dropping in the chat. Two Black male architects that are definitely changing the game as far as I'm concerned. One's in Boston, the other is in St. Paul, Minnesota. Gregory Minot and James Garrett with Formula Architects, and Greg's with Dream Collaborative, doing some amazing things. Been there, done that. They've got the T-shirt to show for it, and they're the guys that have not taken no or been, who sat by the door. They said, no, I want a seat at the table. And they are, to me, because I'm not a trained architect, but if I was training to be an architect and take that next step from a designer to a lead architect, these would be the guys that I would be modeling things after, because they've got it figured out. And not that they're perfect, but they just, we don't have that many to aspire to anyway, right? So all of you guys plus a few other folks. So the numbers are small, so we have to increase those numbers. My prayer is that, like what Melanie was saying earlier, we need to get to like 1,000 architects. So I think that needs to happen. We need to get to 1,000 female architects. So it just, that's it, period, end of story. So.
And I would also like to shout out Brian Lee, who's fantastic and amazing, Michael Ford, Pascal Sablon, Tiffany Brown, Dee Nichols. Everyone is really kind of like pushing kind of the narrative on this conversation right now. And then I feel like people should also shout out other people if you know them or if they're in the chat. But they're really doing good work.
What about Tiffany Brown?
Sorry, say it again.
Tiffany?
Yes.
Cool. Well,
So
you guys.
I put two. I'm sorry.
Oh, what were you saying?
I put two names. Craig Arcott, who is just doing tremendous work here in South Florida. He is the president of NOMA. He just started it up, with a group of the architects. He's also the vice president of AIA Miami, and he's the creator of the BAM, which is the Black Architects in Making program for the young people. He's started it in Florida, and he's moving it throughout Florida. Yes. He's great. He's been really instrumental. He has the same goal and drive as everyone to increase the numbers. And Patricia Green, she was here in the chat. She's my one of my mentors. I worked with her. She's actually the UNESCO chair for the small islands. And so she does a lot. She's an architect. She's a historic preservationist. She was a former dean of the Kerben School of Architecture, and she's presently the head of the PhD program at the Kerben School of Architecture in Jamaica. And so she was here on the chat. I just wanted to shout that out.
Yes, for the shout outs.
Yeah, well, tonight's been really awesome, you guys. Y'all are all badasses. Yeah. Today was really powerful. Really appreciate you guys. We'll have more to come. Appreciate y'all accepting the invite to come on. And yeah, well, this recording will probably be out in a week or two, and I'll be working on getting the next one scheduled. If y'all know anybody who might be interested on being on a future Hear Our Voices panel, let me know.